They said his love had an expiration date. 17 times. 17 closed doors. 17 no's echoing through the silence of a condemned kennel. But the 18th yes? That one rewrote every rule. This is the story of Rebecca and Max, a beautiful senior soul who found his way home against all odds. When Rebecca first encountered Max, he was sitting in the back corner of his kennel, the area shelter workers call death row. His medical chart had a red tag, meaning his time was running out. What struck her wasn't his obvious health issues or his aged appearance. It was the gentle wisdom in his eyes, a spark that somehow survived despite everything he'd endured. The shelter volunteer whispered to Rebecca, "He's been here longer than any other dog. Nobody wants a 12-year-old with health problems." Those words echoed in her mind as Max slowly approached the kennel door, his tail offering the faintest wag, a gesture of hope from a dog who had every reason to give up on humans. What happened next defied all expectations. Against everyone's advice, Rebecca made a decision that would transform both their lives in ways she never could have imagined. The journey they embarked on together revealed something remarkable about senior dogs that most people never discover. A truth so powerful, it eventually inspired a movement. Share in the comments right now a moment when an animal showed you the power of resilience. Your experiences strengthen our Eternal Bonds community and remind everyone why these stories matter so much. The day Rebecca met Max started like any other. She wasn't planning on adopting a dog, especially not a senior one with visible health problems. She was simply dropping off a donation of old blankets and pet food at the local shelter after cleaning out her late grandmother's home. The shelter volunteer, Sarah, thanked her for the donations and asked if she wanted to look around. "We have some puppies that just became available," she said with forced cheerfulness. But something in her eyes told a different story. "You seem troubled," Rebecca said. "Is everything okay?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "We have to make some difficult decisions today. Several dogs have been here too long, and we're out of space." She lowered her voice. "Max is one of them. He's been passed over 17 times. "Can I see him?" Rebecca asked, not knowing those 3 words would change everything. Sarah led her past the main adoption floor, through a door marked Staff Only, and into a quieter section of the shelter. "This is where we keep the dogs who are..." She didn't finish her sentence. She didn't have to. Rebecca knew what this section was, the last stop before euthanasia. The hallway they called Death Row. Hit the like button right now to help spread Max's story to others who need to hear it. And subscribe to Eternal Bonds for more heartwarming journeys of resilience, connection, and unconditional love between humans and the animals who transform our lives. At the very end of the corridor, a large mixed-breed dog with a graying muzzle lay curled in the corner of his kennel. His weary body remained still, only his eyes tracking their movement, a silent witness to yet another evaluation. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark. It was as if he had already given up. "This is Max," Sarah said. 12 years old. His owner died, and the family brought him here 3 months ago. He's been overlooked by everyone because of his age and some health issues." Rebecca knelt down beside his kennel door, not saying anything at first. Max watched her carefully, his eyes revealing a lifetime of stories she couldn't begin to imagine. After a moment, she spoke softly, not to Sarah, but directly to Max. "Hello there. You've had a rough time, haven't you?" At the sound of her voice, something subtle changed in his expression. He lifted his head slightly, ears perking forward just enough to notice, and then the smallest thump of his tail against the concrete floor. Once, twice. "Can I go in?" Rebecca asked Sarah. "Are you sure? He's a bit unpredictable with strangers. And just so you know, he has arthritis, dental disease, and probably needs surgery for a growth on his side. The vet thinks he may also have early kidney issues." But Rebecca wasn't really listening anymore. She was watching Max, who had slowly risen to his feet, wincing slightly as he put weight on his back legs. He was looking at her with an intensity that she couldn't explain. Not aggressive or fearful, but almost like recognition, as if he'd been waiting. When Sarah opened the kennel door, Rebecca expected Max to retreat or show signs of anxiety. Instead, he walked directly to her, his movement stiff but determined. He stopped just inches from her hand, his breath warm against her skin. "He never approaches people first," Sarah whispered, genuine surprise in her voice. Slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted, Rebecca reached out to touch his head. Max closed his eyes at her touch, and then did something that Sarah later told her she had never seen him do in his 3 months at the shelter. He leaned his entire body against Rebecca's leg and sighed deeply, as if finally allowing himself to relax. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Rebecca couldn't explain it rationally, but she knew with absolute certainty that this dog was meant to come home with her. "What happens if no one takes him today?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Sarah's hesitation told her everything. "Tomorrow morning, we have to make room for new arrivals." Rebecca looked down at Max, still leaning against her, trusting her already, though he had every reason not to trust humans anymore. "That's not going to happen," she said. "I'm taking him home." The paperwork took less than an hour. The shelter waived the adoption fee, grateful that Max would get a chance, even if it was just to live out his golden years in comfort. The staff seemed shocked by Rebecca's decision, cautioning her about the medical bills, his potential behavioral issues, and the heartbreak of adopting an elderly dog. But their warnings couldn't shake the certainty she felt. As they walked to her car, Max moved slowly beside her, each step careful and deliberate. When she opened the back door, he looked up at her questioningly. "It's okay," she assured him. "We're going home." Those first few days were challenging in ways Rebecca hadn't anticipated. Max's medical needs were even more extensive than the shelter had realized. Her local vet, Dr. Rivera, examined him thoroughly and revealed the full scope of what they were facing. The cost of his treatment would be substantial, more than Rebecca had budgeted for. But looking at Max, who had begun to follow her around the house like a shadow, she couldn't imagine making any other choice. "Whatever he needs," she told Dr. Rivera. "We'll figure it out." At night, Max would startle awake, trembling and disoriented. Nightmares, most likely. Rebecca would sit beside him, speaking softly until he calmed down. During the day, he flinched at sudden movements and cowered when men with deep voices approached them on their slow walks around the neighborhood. It became clear that Max's wounds weren't just physical. Whatever happened in those 12 years before meeting Rebecca had left invisible scars that ran just as deep as the visible ones. The first breakthrough came on their 5th night together. Rebecca had created a comfortable bed for Max in the living room, but each evening he would pace anxiously when bedtime approached. That night, exhausted from another day of vet visits and medication schedules, she patted the space beside her on her bed. "Just this once," she told him, not really meaning it. Max looked at her for a long moment before carefully climbing up. He turned in 3 slow circles, then settled down with a deep sigh, his body finally relaxing fully as he laid his head on her pillow. For the first time since she'd brought him home, he slept through the entire night without a single nightmare. In the morning, Rebecca woke to find Max watching her, his tail moving in a gentle rhythm against the bed. When their eyes met, something magical happened. Max smiled. Not just the panting expression that looks like a smile, but a genuine brightening of his eyes, a lifting of his spirit that transformed his entire face. "Good morning to you too," she laughed, and the sound of her laughter seemed to delight him even more. That's when Rebecca realized this dog, who had every reason to give up on humans, was choosing to trust again. He was giving her a chance, just as she had given him one. It was the beginning of their journey together, and she had no idea yet how much further they had to go, or how deeply this gray-muzzled, arthritis-ridden dog would change her life. "Max," she whispered, stroking his head, "I promise you'll never be abandoned again." The surgery to remove Max's growth was scheduled for the following week, and in the meantime, they focused on building trust and establishing routines. Rebecca discovered that Max loved routine. It seemed to give him security and confidence. Breakfast at 7 a.m., short walks at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., medications with lunch and dinner, gentle brushing in the evening. With each passing day, she saw glimpses of the dog Max must have been before life had worn him down. The way his ears would perk up at the sound of birds outside. The curious tilt of his head when he encountered something new. The playful bounce that occasionally appeared in his step when he was feeling good. The day of Max's surgery arrived, and Rebecca found herself more anxious than she'd expected. In just a few short weeks, this gray-muzzled senior dog had worked his way deep into her heart. As she handed his leash to the veterinary technician, Max looked back at her with those soulful eyes, a look that seemed to say, "You'll be here when I wake up, right?" "I promise," Rebecca whispered, fighting back tears as they led him away. Dr. Rivera had been honest about the risks. Anesthesia in older dogs always carried additional concerns, and Max's overall condition made him a high-risk patient. "We'll take good care of him," she assured Rebecca, "but you should prepare yourself for all possibilities." Those 5 hours in the waiting room were among the longest of Rebecca's life. She scrolled through photos she'd taken of Max over the past few weeks, his first real walk in the neighborhood, the moment he discovered how comfortable the couch was, the way he'd started to rest his chin on her knee whenever she sat down. Each image told the story of a dog slowly remembering how to live rather than just survive. When Dr. Rivera finally emerged, her face broke into a relieved smile. "He did great," she announced. "We removed the growth, it's being sent for testing, and we've extracted several infected teeth. He's going to be uncomfortable for a few days, but I believe he'll feel much better once he heals." Rebecca was allowed to see Max in recovery, and the sight of him groggy and vulnerable on the examination table brought fresh tears to her eyes. His side was shaved and sutured, and his mouth looked painful, but when he saw her, his tail gave the faintest wag against the metal table. "Take me home." His eyes seemed to plead. The next few days were challenging. Max's medication schedule was rigorous. Antibiotics, pain relievers, anti-inflammatories, and his special soft food diet required careful preparation. He slept most of the time, occasionally whimpering in discomfort despite the pain medication. Rebecca slept on the floor beside his bed, reaching out to comfort him whenever he stirred. The test results came back a week later. The growth was benign. Dr. Rivera also shared another observation during their follow-up visit. "Look at his eyes," she said, gently examining Max. "Notice how much clearer they are? The dental work has probably relieved a significant amount of chronic pain he was experiencing. He's likely feeling better than he has in years." This explained the subtle but significant changes Rebecca had been noticing. Max was moving more easily. He was more alert during their short walks. And most remarkably, he had started to play, hesitantly at first, a curious nudge of a tennis ball with his nose, but then with increasing enthusiasm. As Max's physical recovery progressed, Rebecca discovered that the hardest wounds to heal were the invisible ones. Their first major challenge came unexpectedly during an evening walk. A teenager on a skateboard came around the corner, the wheels clattering loudly on the sidewalk. Max's reaction was instantaneous and heartbreaking. He flattened himself against the ground, trembling violently, a high-pitched whine escaping from his throat. The calendar pages turned as summer arrived. With each passing week, Rebecca noticed subtle but significant shifts in Max's confidence. The physical healing from his surgery had been straightforward, a matter of medication, proper nutrition, and time. But this other kind of healing, the restoration of trust, the willingness to engage with the world without fear, followed no predictable timeline. It happened in small moments that might have seemed inconsequential to anyone else, but to Rebecca, they were milestones worth celebrating. The journey to rebuild trust takes time and patience. Tell us in the comments about a rescue animal that taught you valuable lessons about healing. Each story you share inspires others on their own rescue journeys. "It's okay, Max. You're safe," Rebecca soothed, kneeling beside him on the sidewalk. But Max was beyond hearing her, trapped in some terrible memory. It took nearly 20 minutes before he would move, and when he finally did, he practically dragged Rebecca home, refusing to walk at their usual leisurely pace. After consulting with an animal behaviorist, Rebecca learned that Max likely had a trauma associated with loud, sudden noises, possibly from his past life. Recovery isn't linear, the behaviorist explained. Especially with rescue dogs. They can seem fine for weeks, then something triggers a memory, and they're right back in that moment of fear or pain. Together, they developed a desensitization plan. Starting with recordings of very faint skateboard sounds played during mealtimes, gradually increasing the volume over weeks. It was painstaking work, requiring infinite patience and consistent reassurance. There were setbacks. A neighbor's car backfiring sent Max hiding in the bathroom for hours. 4th of July was particularly difficult. Rebecca ended up creating a safe space in her closet, lined with blankets and playing classical music to drown out the distant fireworks. She spent the entire night there with Max, reading aloud from her favorite book as he trembled against her side. But there were breakthroughs too. The first time Max approached a skateboard, leaning against a park bench, cautiously sniffing it, while the owner, a kind young man who understood Rebecca's explained situation, waited patiently nearby. The afternoon when a truck backfired and Max startled, but then looked to Rebecca for reassurance instead of panicking. Small victories that represented enormous progress. In the weeks following the surgery, Max's transformation became even more evident. His step was firmer, his gaze brighter. As Max continued to heal both physically and emotionally, Rebecca found herself filled with growing confidence that perhaps they had truly left the worst behind. Their bond was strengthening every day, creating a foundation of trust that would soon face an unexpected challenge. Senior dogs have an amazing capacity for resilience, she told Rebecca. People often underestimate them because of their age, but given the right care and environment, they can experience remarkable rejuvenation. This proved especially true one crisp October morning, when Rebecca took Max to a local dog park during off hours. She'd been bringing him regularly, always when it was nearly empty, to help him become more comfortable around other dogs. Usually, he stayed close to her, showing little interest in exploration. But that morning, something changed. As Rebecca sat on a bench, Max suddenly lifted his nose to the air, catching some scent that captured his attention. Then, to her astonishment, he broke into an unmistakable play. Bow front legs stretched out, rear end high in the air, directed at a golden retriever who had just entered with its owner. "He wants to play," the other dog's owner said, sounding as surprised as Rebecca felt. For the next 15 minutes, Max engaged in what might have been his first play session in years. He was slower than the retriever, and his movements were more deliberate, but the joy was unmistakable. When he finally returned to Rebecca's side, panting heavily but with bright eyes and a relaxed expression, she felt a lump form in her throat. This was what healing looked like. That evening, as Max dozed contentedly beside her on the couch, his designated spot, now Rebecca scrolled through social media and came across a post from the shelter where she'd found him. They were hosting an adoption event for senior dogs, with a heartbreaking note about how older dogs were often overlooked. The average senior dog waits 4 times longer to be adopted than younger dogs, the post read. Many never leave the shelter at all. Rebecca looked at Max, peaceful in sleep, and thought about how close he had come to being one of those statistics. A red tag on his kennel, just hours away from euthanasia when she happened to walk in with a donation of blankets. An idea began to form in her mind, something that could perhaps help other dogs like Max. She picked up her phone and began to type a message to the shelter director. What if Max's story could inspire others to consider adopting senior dogs? The response came almost immediately. We'd love that. Senior dogs are the hardest to place. Anything that helps people see their value would be incredible. Rebecca looked at the peaceful form of the dog beside her, the dog no one had wanted, the dog who had shown such remarkable courage and resilience. Maybe this was the beginning of something even bigger than she had imagined. Maybe Max's journey, their journey together, could help change perceptions about older dogs in shelters. As if sensing her thoughts, Max opened one eye, his tail thumping gently against the couch cushion. There was so much life left in this old dog, so much love to give. If only people could see beyond the gray muzzles and slower gaits to the wise, loving souls within. The next morning brought a new challenge, one that would test both of them in unexpected ways. Rebecca received a call from her sister, who had been in an accident and needed help recovering. It would mean traveling across the country for at least 2 weeks, the first separation from Max since his adoption. Rebecca spent days wrestling with the decision. The thought of leaving Max with someone else, even temporarily, filled her with anxiety. What if he thought she was abandoning him, just like everyone else had? What if his trauma resurfaced? What if the trust they'd built crumbled during her absence? "I can't just leave him at a kennel," she told Dr. Rivera during their follow-up appointment. "He's been through too much already." Dr. Rivera nodded understandingly. What about a trusted friend? Someone who could stay at your home, keeping Max in his familiar environment? That evening, Rebecca called her neighbor, Daniel, a retired teacher who had always shown interest in Max's progress. His gentle demeanor and patience had already won Max's tentative approval during their brief encounters in the hallway and on walks. "Of course I'll help," Daniel said without hesitation. "Max and I will have our own little adventure while you're gone. And I'll send you daily updates, videos, everything." The preparations began immediately. Rebecca created detailed instructions, medication schedules, feeding routines, favorite toys, comfort techniques for anxious moments. She invited Daniel over multiple times before her departure, allowing Max to associate him with positive experiences in her presence. The night before her trip, Rebecca sat on the floor beside Max's favorite spot on the couch. "I promise I'm coming back," she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. "This isn't goodbye. It's just see you soon." As if understanding her words, Max gently placed his paw on her arm, a gesture he'd developed when she seemed upset. That simple act of comfort from a dog who had every reason not to trust brought tears to her eyes. The morning of her departure was heart-wrenching. Max sensed something was wrong as soon as she brought out her suitcase. He followed her from room to room, his eyes tracking her every move. When Daniel arrived, Max positioned himself between them, looking from one to the other with obvious concern. "It's okay, buddy," Rebecca reassured him, kneeling to his level. "Daniel's going to take good care of you until I get back." The moment she headed for the door, Max began to whimper. Daniel had to gently hold his collar to prevent him from following her. Rebecca forced herself not to look back as she heard his desperate whines echo down the hallway. The first few days were difficult for everyone. Daniel sent videos of Max sitting by the window for hours, watching the street. He would perk up at the sound of footsteps in the hallway, only to sink back in disappointment when it wasn't Rebecca. He ate little and played less. "He misses you," Daniel texted, "but he's hanging in there. We're taking it one day at a time." By day 5, a small breakthrough Max had begun accepting treats from Daniel's hand and would occasionally join him on the couch during evening television. Daniel had discovered that reading aloud seemed to calm the anxious dog, so he'd started working through his collection of classic novels, Max listening attentively by his side. "I think he's particularly fond of Steinbeck," Daniel joked in one of their daily video calls. "He actually wagged his tail during Of Mice and Men today." On the 7th day, something unexpected happened. Daniel was preparing dinner when he suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed in the kitchen. The noise startled Max, who had been dozing in the living room. Instead of hiding as he might have done before, Max rushed to Daniel's side, licking his face until he regained consciousness. "Your dog saved me today," Daniel told Rebecca over the phone that night, his voice shaky. "I had a minor hypoglycemic episode, forgot to eat with my medication. If Max hadn't alerted me and kept me awake, who knows what might have happened?" Rebecca was simultaneously worried about Daniel and amazed at Max's response. The dog, who had once been terrified of sudden movements and loud noises, had rushed toward danger to help someone in need, someone he'd known for barely a week. "He's not just overcoming his trauma," Dr. Rivera commented when Rebecca called to tell her about the incident. "He's transforming it into compassion. That's incredibly rare and special." During the second week, Max began to show more of his personality with Daniel. He'd bring toys for games of gentle tug-of-war. He'd greet Daniel with a wagging tail when he returned from brief errands. He even allowed Daniel to brush his teeth, a procedure he usually tolerated only from Rebecca. "I think he's decided I'm acceptable company until you return," Daniel messaged, though he still checks the door whenever he hears footsteps. The day before Rebecca's return, Daniel took Max to their local park, where they encountered a young family with a child who used a wheelchair. The little girl, about 7 years old, spotted Max and asked if she could pet him. In the past, children had made Max nervous, their unpredictable movements and loud voices triggering memories he struggled to overcome. Daniel was about to politely decline when Max surprised him by gently approaching the wheelchair, placing his head on the girl's lap with extraordinary gentleness. "He knows I'm different," the girl said, delighted as she stroked his ears. "My mom says animals can sense these things." Daniel captured the moment on video and sent it to Rebecca. "Max made a new friend today. I think he's discovered his superpower knowing exactly who needs his gentle soul the most." When Rebecca finally returned home, the reunion was everything she had hoped for and more. The door had barely opened when Max bounded toward her, his entire body wiggling with joy, whimpering and circling her legs, then rushing back to Daniel as if to say, "Look who's home! She came back just like you promised." That evening, as Rebecca, Daniel, and Max shared a quiet celebration dinner, with a special homemade dog-safe meal for Max, Rebecca noticed something profound had changed. Max no longer looked like a dog waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting disaster around every corner. There was a new confidence in how he moved through the apartment, a certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. "Thank you for taking such good care of him," Rebecca told Daniel. "I was so worried he'd feel abandoned again." Daniel smiled, reaching down to stroke Max's head. "I don't think he ever doubted you'd come back. He was waiting, not worrying. There's a difference." Later that night, as Rebecca settled into bed with Max curled beside her, she reflected on how far they'd come. The terrified dog from the shelter had transformed before her eyes, not just physically, but in spirit. His capacity to trust again, to help others despite his own trauma, to form new connections while maintaining unwavering loyalty, was nothing short of miraculous. What Rebecca didn't yet realize was that their journey together was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge them both in ways they couldn't imagine and ultimately lead to a purpose neither of them saw coming. Max's story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The first hint came the very next morning. Rebecca was sorting through her mail when she discovered a letter from the shelter where she'd adopted Max. It was a standard follow-up, checking on his progress, but included was a newspaper clipping that caught her attention. The headline read, "Local Shelter Faces Closure, Senior Dogs at Risk." According to the article, the county shelter, the very one where Max had been, was facing severe budget cuts. Without additional funding, they would be forced to limit their operations, meaning fewer resources for harder-to-place animals, particularly seniors. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. The image of all those senior dogs without the chance Max had haunted her. As she watched her companion sleeping peacefully, an idea began to form. Not just a solution for the shelter, but a change in how people saw these animals. What if Max's story could open the eyes of other potential adopters? What if his transformation could inspire other second chances? Rebecca reached for her phone and began scrolling through the hundreds of photos she'd taken of Max since his adoption. Each image told part of his story, from the frightened dog at the shelter to the confident companion who now brought joy everywhere he went. People needed to see this transformation wasn't just physical, but spiritual. Max hadn't just gained weight and healed his wounds. He'd rediscovered his capacity for trust, play, and love. "People think they're just giving these dogs a comfortable place to die," she whispered to herself. "They don't realize they're actually giving them a place to truly live, maybe for the first time." "They don't stand a chance," Rebecca whispered, looking over at Max, who was contentedly chewing a toy nearby. "If this had happened 3 months ago, you..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Max never getting his second chance was too painful to articulate. As if sensing her distress, Max abandoned his toy and came to sit beside her, pressing his warm body against her leg in silent comfort. "I have to do something," she whispered, looking at Max. His transformation over the past months had been nothing short of miraculous. From a terrified, physically broken dog to this confident, loving companion who now gazed at her with complete trust. How many more dogs like Max were waiting for their chance? That evening, Rebecca couldn't sleep. Her mind kept returning to the countless senior dogs who might never experience what Max had the opportunity to know: love, comfort, and security in their golden years. By morning, she had made a decision. She called the shelter director, Carol, and arranged a meeting. "I'm not surprised they're cutting the budget," Carol sighed when they met at a local cafe 3 days later. "Senior dog care is expensive, and adoption rates are so low. People want puppies, not gray-muzzled dogs with health issues." She gestured toward Max, who lay quietly at Rebecca's feet. He was one of the lucky ones. "But what if we could change that perception?" Rebecca asked, her voice gaining strength with each word. "What if we could show people exactly what they're missing when they pass by those older dogs?" That conversation sparked what would become Second Chance Seniors, a social media campaign featuring Max as its ambassador. Rebecca began documenting Max's daily life, his quirky habits, his gentle wisdom, and the profound bond they shared. She highlighted the unique benefits of adopting senior dogs, their established personalities, their appreciation for simple comforts, their immediate gratitude. The response was modest at first, a few likes, some sympathetic comments. But everything changed when Rebecca posted a video of Max's reaction to receiving a new orthopedic bed. The elderly dog approached it cautiously, sniffed it thoroughly, and then looked back at Rebecca as if asking permission. When she nodded encouragingly, Max carefully stepped onto the bed, turned in 3 slow circles, and then collapsed with a sigh of pure contentment, his eyes closing in bliss. 12 years, Rebecca narrated softly in the video. 12 years, and this is the first time he's had a bed that doesn't hurt his joints. Imagine finding comfort for the first time when you're already old. This is why senior dogs deserve a chance. The video went viral overnight. Rebecca woke to thousands of notifications and emails from people sharing stories of their own senior dog adoptions, or asking how they could help. Local news stations called requesting interviews. Suddenly, Max wasn't just Rebecca's rescued dog. He had become a symbol, a furry ambassador for all the overlooked seniors in shelters. Carol called, her voice trembling with excitement. "You won't believe what's happening at the shelter. We've had more inquiries about senior dog adoption in the past week than in the entire previous year. 3 of our oldest residents have already found homes." The momentum continued to build. A pet supply company reached out offering to donate orthopedic beds to the shelter. A local veterinarian volunteered to provide discounted care for adopted senior dogs. Rebecca found herself at the center of a growing movement, with Max trotting calmly by her side through it all, his quiet dignity touching hearts wherever they went. "It's not just about saving the shelter anymore," Rebecca told Daniel during one of their regular coffee meetups. "It's about changing how people see these dogs. Every time someone chooses a senior dog over a puppy, it's like they're choosing Max. It's like they're saying those 17 rejections were wrong." Daniel smiled, watching Max accept gentle pets from a child at the next table. "He was born for this role. Look at him, he's a natural ambassador." Indeed, Max seemed to understand the importance of his public appearances. Despite his previous anxiety around strangers, he remained calm and gentle during events, allowing children and adults alike to pet him. He had a particular way of making eye contact with each person who approached, a soulful gaze that seemed to communicate decades of wisdom and love. 6 months after the newspaper article arrived, Rebecca and Max stood before the city council. The campaign had grown beyond their wildest expectations, and now they were advocating for increased funding for senior animal care at local shelters. Max lay at Rebecca's feet as she addressed the council members, occasionally glancing up at her encouragingly. "Senior dogs like Max aren't just pets waiting to die," Rebecca explained, her voice steady and passionate. "They're family members waiting to be found. They're teachers of patience and gratitude. They're living reminders that it's never too late for a new beginning." When she finished speaking, there was a moment of silence before the council chamber erupted in applause. Later that week, the council voted unanimously to increase shelter funding with a dedicated portion for senior animal care. The victory celebration at the shelter was bittersweet. While volunteers and staff rejoiced over the funding news, Rebecca noticed Max behaving strangely. He seemed tired, reluctant to move. When they got home, he refused his dinner, something he had never done before. Alarmed, Rebecca called Dr. Rivera, who agreed to see them immediately despite the late hour. After a thorough examination and blood tests, the veterinarian's expression was grave. "His kidney values are significantly elevated," she explained gently. "At his age, with his history, this isn't entirely unexpected, but I'm concerned about how rapidly this seems to have developed." Rebecca felt her world tilt. "What can we do?" "We'll start him on fluids and medication right away," Dr. Rivera said. "But Rebecca, I want to be honest with you. Given his age and condition, we need to be realistic about expectations." The next 3 days were a blur of veterinary visits, medication schedules, and sleepless nights. Rebecca took time off work to be with Max, setting up a comfortable space in the living room where she could monitor him constantly. Daniel stopped by daily, bringing meals that Rebecca barely touched, and sitting with Max so she could shower or rest briefly. On the 4th day, Max seemed to rally. He ate a small amount of the special kidney diet Dr. Rivera had prescribed, and even wagged his tail when Rebecca sat beside him. For a few hours, hope bloomed in Rebecca's heart. Throughout that week, Rebecca witnessed the cruel contradiction of hope and decline that often accompanies end-of-life care. Max would have moments of energy, a particularly engaged look, a few steps taken with enthusiasm, followed by longer periods of evident discomfort. Dr. Rivera had prepared her for this pattern, explaining that it was common in kidney failure, but experiencing it firsthand was a different kind of heartbreak altogether. "It's like watching the tide go out," Daniel observed quietly one evening as they sat beside Max's bed. "Each wave comes back a little less than before." Rebecca nodded, understanding the metaphor all too well. The Max who had bounded toward her upon her return from her sisters was retreating, replaced by a quieter, more fragile version of himself. Yet even in his weakness, his eyes followed her movements around the room with unwavering devotion. But that night, Max's condition deteriorated rapidly. His breathing became labored, and despite the medication, he seemed to be in pain. Rebecca called Dr. Rivera, who came to the apartment rather than subjecting Max to the stress of another car ride. "I think his body is shutting down," Dr. Rivera said quietly after examining him. "We need to consider what's best for him now, not what we wish could be." Those words broke something in Rebecca. She had known, rationally, that her time with Max would be limited. Senior dog adoption always came with that understanding. But facing the reality was entirely different from acknowledging the abstract concept. "Can he understand what's happening?" Rebecca asked, tears streaming down her face. "Dogs live in the present," Dr. Rivera replied gently. "Right now, all he knows is that you're here with him, and he's not alone. That's the greatest gift you can give him." Rebecca nodded, struggling to compose herself. She had promised Max he would never be abandoned again, and she intended to keep that promise until the very end. As painful as this moment was, she wouldn't leave his side. "I won't leave you," Rebecca whispered, holding Max's paw as his breathing became more labored. The night stretched endlessly before them, a vigil of love in its purest form. Dr. Rivera had kindly left them with pain medication to ensure Max's comfort, promising to return in the morning if needed. Throughout that long night, Rebecca spoke softly to Max, reminiscing about their journey together. "Remember our first walk in the park? You were so scared of everything, and now look at you, the bravest dog I've ever known." Max's eyes, though clouded with age and illness, remained fixed on Rebecca's face, as if memorizing every feature. Near dawn, something remarkable happened. Despite his weakness, Max lifted his head slightly and gave Rebecca's hand a gentle lick, a final "thank you," before laying his head back down with a peaceful sigh. In that quiet moment, surrounded by love he had waited his entire life to find, Max slipped away. He waited until he knew you would be okay," Daniel said later that day as they sat together in the apartment that felt impossibly empty. "He needed to know his mission was complete." Rebecca nodded through her tears. "What mission? He was just a dog who needed love." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, he was much more than that. Through you, he changed how an entire community sees senior dogs. That's not just a dog who needed love, that's a dog with a purpose." The memorial service for Max was unlike anything the local animal rescue community had ever seen. Over 100 people gathered in the park, where he had finally learned to play people who had followed his journey online. Families who had adopted senior dogs because of his story, and shelter volunteers whose perspectives had been forever changed. Instead of flowers, Rebecca had asked for donations to the shelter's new Max Fund dedicated specifically to the care and adoption of senior dogs. By the end of the day, they had raised enough to cover medical care for every senior dog in the shelter for an entire year. "Max wasn't just rescued," Rebecca said, addressing the gathered crowd. "He became a rescuer himself. He didn't save just one life, he saved hundreds through his story. But perhaps the most profound legacy was the change in how people viewed these gray-muzzled companions. Where once they had been passed over deemed too old or too much work, they were now seen for what they truly were: souls with wisdom, love to give, and hearts still capable of healing and joy. The story of Max, a dog who waited 12 years for his forever home, reminds us that it's never too late for love, for purpose, or for making a difference. His journey from the back kennel of a shelter to becoming the face of a movement shows us that even our darkest moments can lead to the most beautiful transformations. If Max's story touched your heart today, please hit the like button and subscribe to Eternal Bonds. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of rescue, redemption, and the incredible bond between humans and animals who find each other exactly when they need it most. What was your favorite moment in Max's journey? Share in the comments below using the phrase "second chance," followed by what touched you most, whether it was his first night of peaceful sleep, his connection with Daniel, or the movement he inspired. Your stories and reflections help build our community of animal lovers who believe in the power of compassion. Stay tuned for our next journey of transformation, a story that will show you how an unexpected encounter on a rainy night changed not just one life, but an entire family's destiny forever. Some souls find us when we least expect them, but need them the most.